said, I am the research officer for British Mensa, and we're very, very excited to have this study and some of the preliminary results that we can share with you. As many, if not all of you know by now, we replicated a study that was first conducted in the US. It's the hyperbrain hyperbody study. And we're very, very lucky to have Ruth and Audrey with us. What I'm going to do, first of all, before I jump in to tell you a bit more about both of our brilliant researchers, is to thank you all. If you had not participated in this research in the numbers that you did, there would have been no hope for getting it off the ground or having useful data. So we just want to say a very, very heartfelt thank you for taking part in it, because this is why we have the data, because of you guys. So moving on then to the biographies, because I just wanted to share with you a little bit more about our star researchers. Ruth is the architect of the hyperbrain hyperbody model. She's a psychotherapist, educational psychologist, and a published researcher specializing in high IQ research. She was always the principal investigator in this groundbreaking area of study. And there was an article called High Intelligence, a Risk Factor for Psychological and Physiological Overexcitabilities, which was published a few years ago in a really high-ranked journal. Her research, excuse me, boldly explores how exceptional cognitive capacity may also be associated with emotional and physiological vulnerabilities. She developed the hyperbrain hyperbody theory, which you may see referenced later as the HBHB, bridging high intelligence research and psychoneuroimmunology to explain a heightened mind-body communication. The framework has since been referenced widely across scientific, academic, and international intelligence communities. Her clinical work centers on supporting gifted clients whose cognitive strengths coexist with various challenges. She's committed to being a fierce advocate for them by continuing to bring worldwide awareness to the unique neurodiversity that is presented within the gifted population. So, Ruth, welcome. Thank you for speaking with us today. I just wanted to share a very quick story here. I actually presented the hyperbrain hyperbody model at Mensa Cambridge 40th anniversary a few years ago. And I actually used the model when I lectured to executive MBA students every year. And people just engaged with it so well. And it was getting to know that model and engaging with it that made me think maybe we could reach out to these guys and ask them if they would be interested in, you know, becoming involved in a British Mensa study. And we were extraordinarily lucky that they actually were. So moving on to Dr. Audrey Kolb, who's an amazing statistician. As you all know, in terms of research design, you cannot conduct good research unless you've got somebody very talented in this area on your team. So Audrey is the talented statistical co-author and research scientist behind the study, High Intelligence, a Risk Factor for Psychological and Physiological Overexcitabilities, partnering with lead researcher Ruth, a collaboration that began in their undergraduate years. She built the quantitative framework that tested and validated Ruth's original theory. With a doctorate in industrial organizational psychology, Audrey focuses on the how and how well of measurement. Her role in the studies was to ensure the data told a precise and truthful story, transforming observations of high-intensity lived experiences into peer-reviewed statistical evidence, which is just wonderful. This first US-based study provided the foundational proof of concept. Now their scientific partnership continues with a new study focusing on the UK population. So welcome, Audrey, and thank you so much for coming. To let everybody know what we're going to do now going forward, the basic structure is that you'll be hearing less of me now and a lot more from Audrey and Ruth, which I'm sure you'll be happy about. We're going to start with a conversation with both researchers, and I'm going to be asking them some fascinating questions about the hyperbrain hyperbody research, the study, the data, the design, just so you can find out a lot more about it. And to find out what kind of data we collected and what kind of findings are coming out of the study. Once we've done that, which will take about 2/3 probably of our time, we're then going to move on to some questions that we already have from our members. What I would like to say at this point is we would love to hear your stories and your experiences if this research resonates with you. So if it does and you would like to share your story confidentially, and just tell us more. And if this does resonate you, please feel free to reach out and email me or share any thoughts that you have that you would like me to pass on to these guys. And we would just love to hear more about what you think. So I'd like to now pass the floor over to our researchers. I'm just thinking here, I have to move. I can't see this question because I have a Zoom bar in the way. Hang on. What made you develop? I think this is a question for Ruth. What made you develop the original hyperbrain, hyperbody study in the first place?
This is my baby. And actually, what had me thinking about running this study is the twice exceptionality of my own son. Actually, both my sons are what we would consider twice exceptional, where when they were really young, they were just struggling in school, and I just couldn't like understand why they were so brilliant, but they were struggling so much. And in our family, we have basically just different situations that made me put together the just pattern that I was seeing. But I was a mom at home and I didn't have resources to be able to run the study. Flash forward to being an undergrad, I did that later in life. And so why they even accepted me was because of how excited they were about this concept of kind of turning upside down this prevailing assumption that high IQ is protective and that you just sail through school and life. That just wasn't our experience. So I was really very interested in just hearing the stories of people with high IQ and see if it was like ours. And turns out that it's much more like ours than was supposed. And yeah, scatter matters. That's a big, big term in school psychology world. Actually, theirs is scatters doesn't matter. Well, we know now that scatter does matter. And what scatter means is when you're doing an IQ test, they're looking at various things. They're looking at, of course, verbal and mathematical comprehension and things, but they're also looking at working memory. They're also looking at things that involve executive function, processing speed. And very often in the twice exceptional community, meaning you have high IQ and also something kind of getting in the way. And also that thing getting in the way of the high IQ diagnosis or finding. And so my message to the world in developing this study was that scatter does matter. A really quick story. My son was denied for the gifted program at his school when he was in elementary school because of the timed nature. His processing speed is very low. So, but interestingly, Mensa, when I sent his psychoeducational and his psychoed report to them, they saw through this. And it became my mission to, highlight that there are a lot of kids and adults that were missing. So I was hoping this study would shine light on the difficulties within high IQ.
Well, thank you so much for that, Ruth. Um, I want to move on to question two. It might sound like an obvious question, but in some ways it isn't. What made you approach American Mensa specifically as an organization to try and run this research?
Well, it is, you guys are amazing, amazingly responsive. And we appreciate that so much. So I wanted to just say that right off the bat. It's very hard with giftedness being, intellectual giftedness being 2% of the population. It's very hard to find a large group, a number that we could really get information from. And Mensa is already reliably tested at the top 2 percentile. So it just made sense to me to reach out to Mensa to see if we could work together.
Fantastic. Audrey, if you want to jump in any of these questions, do let me know. I'm going to direct the stats questions to you, obviously, naturally, but do let me know if you want to jump in on any of these. So number three, and I'll direct this to Ruth, as the architect of this study, could you give us now an overview of the hyperbrain hyperbody theory, how it works?
Yeah, yeah. There's a model here that we created to kind of go through simply what the theory itself is. We start with high intelligence or intellectual overexcitability, and that's based on Dabrowski's framework, where he looked at overexcitabilities within the high intelligence community and found five that were very prominent. And that would be the intellectual overexcitability, and also the psychomotor, which, if you look on the model, the ADHD portion really speaks to that overexcitability. And the emotional is very pivotal. He found heightened emotional overexcitabilities in his studies. Also, the sensory overexcitabilities, and also the imaginational overexcitability. I was looking at those and I was thinking about how you can have one or many of those, but definitely usually have one. So we have this overexcitability that starts off this cascade. I looked at the field of psychoneuroimmunological framework, which is what this is looking at, is you have this brain and how it talks to the body. So we have the brain starting off as overexcitable, right? And then the high IQ, we're looking at greater than 130. We just show that it may be more prone to respond to these stressors with rumination and worry. Um, uh, they take in their environment very intensely. We do, I should say, and creates this psychological piece. And then the heightened cognitive stress, it is a reactivity via the central nervous system, kind of starts there. There's a basically a it can lead to things like mood disorders. We looked specifically at bipolar and depression, and also anxiety disorders. The worry leads to the general social OCD, those types of anxiety disorders. I put environmental triggers because I feel like that's a very important piece of how this cascade kind of works. But when the mind is heightened and the emotions are heightened, it sends this cascade of events in the form of physiological overexcitabilities, which is heightened cortisol and cytokine activity. Those types of things are inflammatory issues that can lead to things like allergies, asthma, autoimmune disease, and we also are finding out, especially now, that autism is related to neuroinflammation. And so that's kind of an overview of the theory, that basically is just like a flyby. So,
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Now, Audrey, I want to pass the floor straight on to you here. Could you give us an overview of the American Mensa study design with whatever kind of backstory there is also with the data and the statistics and the study design that you would like to share?
Yeah. So when we were thinking about how to test this model, we wanted to um, basically figure out how to compare health profiles of the high intelligence group against national averages representing the average intelligence. And we were kind of thinking about that. There was a couple of ways that we could go about getting that data for our comparison. Um, we ended up going with the national averages because America has a pretty good repository of that kind of information on government websites, or they did at the time. We haven't looked at the US data in a while. And uh, if we had tried to survey the Americans in the regular folks in the same way, we still would have run into the issue of having at least 2% of that data source being people that could be in Mensa. Um, so we ended up recruiting the American Mensas from the research panels that they have. It's almost half of the total population of the US Mensa group that they volunteer for research. And we sent out a survey via email, very similar to what we did in the UK. Survey was a little different. We had additional questions in there that was a little different, and we weren't working with Mensa as directly. So we didn't have those Mensa-centric questions in there. But we hit the same health profile questions generally. And then yeah, we used statistical tests to see if the differences were meaningful, with the assumption that if the national average says that there should be a 20% of something, if Mensa had higher percentage, then high intelligence is related to that, whatever that condition is. We also elected to look at both the folks that had professional diagnoses and those who just suspected that they had the different disorders, because the diagnosis of disorders relies heavily on healthcare access, which you likely know is very different between the US and the UK. Many people in the US lack access to financial ability or lack of health insurance because it's tied to work, or distance to medical care because they live in rural communities, or avoidance of healthcare or other factors. And also things like environmental allergies, you might not ever get that diagnosed unless it's extreme, right? Um, so it made sense that some of the conditions that like require medical diagnoses, like asthma and autoimmune disease, would be more diagnosed, and other conditions might be less diagnosed. So in the graph here, you can kind of see the what we found, which is all of the ones that we tested did have higher prevalence in our Mensa sample compared to the national averages. Some of the difference was like not that big. Like you can see with the autism spectrum, the differences between the diagnosed and the national average was not that big. But then if you include the people who suspected that they had it, difference is a lot bigger. For most of the other ones, you can see the difference between the green bar for the national and the orange bar for the diagnosed. They're dramatically different.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you very much for that. I think we're going to move on to actually, I think we're going to come back to some of those stats soon, Audrey. So thank you very much for that. Back to Ruth for this one. And Audrey, please add anything you'd like to. Ruth, how was the American study received when you actually published the results?
Well, it was first presented at the International Society of Intelligence Research Conference, and I was very nervous to present it because I knew what the prevailing attitudes about anything that was a struggle for those with high IQ would be questioned. And so I presented there. It was very surprising how well it was received by most of the intelligence researchers around the world that were there. It won the poster prize actually at the time, which I was just thrilled by because this was again, a groundbreaking study that really nobody had explored or looked at or considered. So it was very new to them. And that was since then, though, it has had mostly very positive reviews from people. There were questions, and we could talk about this later about, the methodology as far as who we were sampling. But I got so much feedback. The important feedback to me was the feedback of the people that are affected and how they resonated with it and they felt heard, and that their lived experience was actually being highlighted, and they were just really relieved. We got some really good press, just a lot of people talking. I mean, all over the world, we've received so much feedback. I'm really happy to say that Audrey and I have been really able to kind of field any of their negativity with some really great evidence and just being able to explain how the methodology that we used. And so we were always really able to answer the criticisms with some good data. But the way that people received it was just so heartening. And I listed a couple of the direct quotes here that I won't read them all, but you can read them and just see a common theme that people have just felt like they were heard, and using words like much needed attention and just how it resonated with them. So I was just I think we were just very happy to know that we spoke to their lived experience.
I'll add on to
Fantastic.
that. The For the younger generation of folks, um, the our study was the top trending topic in the neuroscience area of Reddit for several weeks. It was
Wow.
a really, really hot topic.
It's a
So
really
yeah.
hot topic. Yeah, those comments were fun to read, that's for sure. And so yeah, I mean, Rick and Morty, that people, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that series, but uh just random pop culture, just things would pop out. And it's been in some magazines like basically Scientific American, which is a dream of mine to be able to have an article in there about that somebody had written, very pretty positive. And then um, in France, uh, Scientist V, I think it was. I don't know if I'm even saying that right. There's a really lovely article about high intelligence in there. So it's getting people talking. And that is what we wanted, was for this study to start a different conversation than what has been in the past regarding high IQ.
Thank you so much, both of you. I mean, I think it's a very exciting study and so innovative. And like you say, it needs to be discussed far more. So I'm not surprised to see that there was so much interest. And, we're very, very lucky that we have you guys replicating the study with, our population. So very, very cool. How do you feel this study is different to the orthodox view of IQ or high intelligence, which tends to view high IQ only really as a benefit?
Yeah, so basically, as I was saying, there's been some pushback with the elite individuals or intellectuals that don't want this discussed, right? So because that orthodox view has been very long-standing and held very tightly. So basically, what happens though when they give us evidence or other studies that look at high IQ as a benefit, the problem is they usually stop short of high IQ. They usually just show a trend upwards. That's number one. So they basically, the curvilinear relationship that we suspect is happening would not be seen. They would just see as, oh, it's a benefit. Number two, they're looking a lot at conditions that do not affect like inflammation, inflammatory processes. They're looking at things like longevity and life expectancy, which we do know that is protective of certain things, but they weren't looking at the type of cascade that this psychoneuroimmunological cascade that we're talking about. They weren't looking at those conditions. So, yeah, I think there's just been a lot of protection over the concept of high intelligence, and we just kind of turned it upside down a little bit for some people. So yeah.
And your most recent presentation was at Stanford, right? When you brought this, and when
Yes.
that was just a few weeks ago, I think, right?
Yeah, it was a couple months ago, and I was asked to present the research to a neurodiversity summit there. And the reception I received was just amazing. People coming up and talking to me and sharing their experiences and how this resonated with them and kind of told their story basically was was really encouraging and makes us really want to go forward with, just to keep getting the message out there. Because a lot of people I heard over and over, yes, yes, like this was their experience. So it's just very validating. Just the scientific community, we just need to be more infiltrated in getting more research out there, just to keep turning it kind of upside down. Because there is a neurodiversity within high IQ. That's the message that I'm trying to get out, is we're trying to say that neurodiversity within it, because you can have high intelligence and be able to sail through school and be completely, have no executive dysfunction whatsoever, and that's fine. But that doesn't encompass all of high IQ, the high intelligence community. We know that there are those of us who who are being missed because of different disabilities and things that we might, especially ADHD, which, it can really get in the way of a diagnosis, especially for children.
I'll add on to that. Industrial organizational psychology, it's basically psychology in the workplace, and IQ is very much associated with success at work. And this is another area where they ignore the neurodiversity issues, and there's a lot of bias in the workplace against people with like ADHD and autism and all these kind of things. And they kind of forget that there's a lot of people, with high intelligence that have these other conditions that impact work. So
Yeah.
I- Yeah, thank you for that. I was going to say it's been 4 years now that I've been presenting your research to an executive MBA crowd. Most are senior managers, and they tend to be fascinated by this because I think a lot of them who work in IT, engineering, this kind of stuff, medicine, are working with managing very high IQ teams. And I think they see a lot of this, but they don't know how to navigate it. So it's very fascinating. Um, could you give us now an overview of your experience of replicating the study with British Mensa? Ruth and Audrey, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts. And how did this happen? Why were you excited to do it? And how did it differ from the process going through it with the American Mensa?
Yeah, I can start and just say we were so excited to hear from you all. One of the limitations of our study, or actually, no, it was future research. One of the future research sections in our paper was to examine other countries. Is this just unique to America? Is this worldwide? Is this something that we can replicate? And so the fact that you approached us was just amazing because we could actually start answering that question. Um, and doing future research because, as you all know, science is always changing, always evolving, and there are limitations and also steps forward that we need to take to validate some of our findings. So the fact that we could do that with you all is just total blessing. We were really thankful.
Well, we're very lucky to have you, that's for sure. We're so happy that you agreed to come on board and be a huge, huge part of this or lead the research, really. Audrey, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
um yeah, it's just really helpful to have a organization that's partnering with us on something like this, because a lot of the research that is done, like medical type research, is heavily funded, and we are not.
Mhm.
We're doing this on
Yeah.
our free time, and without having Mensa partnering with us, it just wouldn't happen.
I
Yeah.
know that's fantastic. Fantastic. Well, let me press the right button here. Yes. Actually diving deeper then into the British Mensa results. Audrey, I'll hand this over to you. We've got a bit more detail here, and I think on the next slide, the next three slides actually. So you just let me know when I should move on to the next slide, but please do showcase the results and talk us through the data. And this will be fascinating for all of us.
Yeah. So for the bridge study, so we sent the survey to all of UK, but for the actual uh results, like we had to narrow it down to just England, because of the availability of comparative results and the sampling sizes and stuff. So I apologize as a US person. I might interchange British English and UK. But for the folks from England, we had 1,373 participants who gave their time to complete the survey. Overall, we had very similar results to what we had with the US data. Nearly all of the measured diseases and disorders had higher percentages of diagnoses in the Mensa survey compared to the national average, um, especially when including those without formal diagnoses. And the graph is color coded the same way as the previous graph. So the green is the national data, the orange is the formal diagnosis, and the blue is the formal plus folks who suspected that they have the things. So even if we're just looking at the formal diagnoses, the biggest differences that we saw were in ADHD, asthma, chronic fatigue, depression, generalized anxiety, lactose intolerance, and panic disorders. All of these had effect sizes indicating that those were with higher intelligence were at least twice as likely to be diagnosed with these disorders compared to the national averages. Um, However, there were conditions that had similar or lower rates to the national averages, including borderline personality disorder, dyslexia, and fibromyalgia. Um, Others, like OCD, PTSD, and hay fever, had similar weights between the percent of formal, formal, formally diagnosed Mensa members as the national average. But when you look at those who suspect that they have those conditions, those with higher IQ were much more likely to have these diagnoses. So yeah, you can go to the next slide. It might be a little bit more clear. Um, so the English data here is presented as all these individual diagnoses. Um, Sorry, my Zoom is kind of freaking out. Did you move to the comparative?
Should I go to that one?
There, yeah. Um, um, so when we're comparing the results to the American study, I stripped down the data to just the conditions that were measured in both the studies, and without as many uh, disorders there, it's a little easier to see. Um, so you can see that the patterns are really similar across the population, or yeah, across both the U.S. study and the data from England. We get asked a lot about how similar are the results between the two studies. And I'll say that we have not done a statistical analysis comparing the results. The main reason for this is that even within England, the diagnosis rates over time for many of the disorders have increased. And because of the time difference of the data, we expect there to be differences in the US if we did the study again. So we can't really compare those with any sort of honesty there. Of course, we could always try to replicate it in the US again. But we can look at these and kind of get a general idea of the similarities. You can see that some of these have a really uncanny similarity. Like asthma and autoimmune, like they look almost identical. I had to triple check the data to make sure that I had not messed it up, and it's just, yeah, almost perfectly
Amazing.
aligned. Yeah, some of the differences are interesting, but it might be explained by time. Especially like ADHD and autism awareness. It's increased dramatically in the last decade, especially because when we did the first study in 2017, that was right after the DSM-5 was released. The DSM is basically the listing of every psychological disorder there is and the how you diagnose and everything. That's what doctors and insurance companies use. At least in America. And that's when they reclassified Asperger's as part of the overall autism spectrum.
Right.
So you have definitional changes happening, as well as like social and other things happening over time. Some of these differences are likely environmental. For example, the UK has a much higher rate of hay fever compared to the environmental allergies reported by the US. But if you think about it, like the US is so vast geographically that it's a little difficult to compare. Like England might be more similar to like Seattle, but for the US data, it also includes like the deserts of Arizona where there's less trees.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so so those in England might be more likely to get actual diagnoses compared to the US due to healthcare systems as well. Or maybe there's a severity issue. These are things that we can't really measure. We can hypothesize about, but it makes it really difficult to do a comparison across. Um, but overall, we can see that the results are generally similar. And it does suggest that overall higher intelligence is related to the higher rates of these different psychological and physiological disorders.
Yeah, and I will say that part of in the model that we shared before, where we talked about the environmental pieces, I was very interested because the USA and other countries differ in the way food is processed, what is allowed in food, so I was very, very interested to see if the USA would be a little different. So I was really interested in the results that we got.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys. It's absolutely fascinating to see the similarities here.
Hmm.
Moving on, how did you find the experience of replication, specifically in terms of trying to get the data? And I can offer a small anecdote to begin, is that this was me starting off trying to get a hold of the data. And I wondered if there was something going quite wrong with me because I was spending quite a long time. And the big old spreadsheet that I ended up sharing with Audrey and Ruth, had way too many empty columns than I was, expecting to have. And then these guys, managed to really clear that data up on those links to the right articles, to the right data sets. But it was nevertheless quite a different experience, wasn't it, for both of you collecting data from our side of the pond?
Yeah. So for the US data, we were able to find everything we needed from government websites, primarily the NIH and CDC. Um, so yeah, having to like dig through a lot more organizations and sometimes accessing like original research done by individual authors rather than from the government, um, or like a big allergy website was completely different. Um, uh, Also with the data being more centralized in the US and those government websites, we also got more information on like comorbidity. So instead of having data for just like the number of people with anxiety, the number of people with depression, you also know the number of people that have both, which allowed
Mm,
us to do those larger groups for the US. And we don't
mm.
have that information for the UK. So we can't combine the data like that to make it easier for readers, which is unfortunate. Um, Yeah, with the UK data also, like sometimes you can only find information for the UK as a whole. Sometimes we
Mm.
found information for England. Sometimes
Yeah.
we found it for like England, but not like Ireland either. Like there's like all these different variations that we didn't have to deal with the US at all. Um, and the other big thing was the data access itself. For the US, it was easier to get the big numbers because it was all collected together like that. But if you wanted to actually dig into the data itself at all, like get like demographic splits and stuff like that, you had to get like special permissions as a researcher in order to
Mhm.
access that data.
Mm.
But for the UK data, most of it was like I was able to access a lot of those breakdowns really easily.
Mm.
So it's like basically public access to those like like splitting it out by demographics and all those kind of things. So that was actually really helpful.
Yeah.
Um,
And I will
yeah.
say that the experience of working with you all was a pleasure. I mean, it went so smoothly. And so this was what we've been talking about, the trickiest part. But as far as the way that we were able to work with you guys was just very, very seamless and really a pleasure.
Likewise, guys, definitely. What next before we go on to the members' questions? What next for the hyperbrain, hyperbody theory?
Yeah, so it's exciting. We have a journal that is interested in publishing. So we are pulling together all the data and putting it in a form that we can present and for peer review. So that is definitely the first step. We're still kind of trying to decide where it's going to make the biggest impact because there are so many different pieces to this model. I mean, you could look at all the different fields, the mental health field, and I will say the mental health is the one that people kind of zero in on a lot. And even in the press and things like that, it's all about the mental health piece. But there are other things like the immune system, immunology, those kind of journals too. There's just a lot of different places that scientifically that this could fit or be interesting. And so we're still trying to find, the greatest fit for it, and really excited that we have two under our belt in this. And then basically looking for collaborators. Something I've wanted to do so much is to do a rodent model of this model to kind of test it, the immune system, and like exposure to what's called a Doogie mouse, which I don't know if any of you know who Doogie Howser was way back in the day, was this prodigy doctor that was, what was he, like 14 or something ridiculous? But they named this mouse after him as the Doogie mouse, and it's really a high IQ mouse. And would be so interesting to take that mouse and do some experiments where we look at this model and see if it replicates in that arena. So that's just a side thing. So I'm kind of have my feelers out for people already in that field that could do something like that. And then a book is being penned. So we're hoping that we can reach a wider audience than just the scientific community or people not interested in looking at the actual research papers. Would love to have it in book form so that people more can resonate with it and share it. So
Well, we can
that's
definitely make sure that Mensa members get told about the book when it comes out, when that's written. So that all sounds very exciting. I put all of the members' questions on one slide now, just so that we have them here, just to let everybody listening know. We did receive quite a few questions, so we didn't have time to go through all of them, but we took some representative questions. We hope that's okay. The first one I'll answer: has any link been found between the HB theory, hyperbrain, hyperbody theory, and dyslexia? Well, obviously, you would have seen dyslexia on the slides that Audrey was talking us through. But I can just say, from my own perspective, I have a dyslexic child, and I know the last thing he'd ever want to do in his life is sit an IQ test because of the processing situation, where it's timed and the executive processing is important. Nevertheless, he's a smart little guy. And that I think, Audrey, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think dyslexics were a little bit underrepresented in the sample. And it could be for that reason, maybe, that we have dyslexics underrepresented.
Definitely. Also, it's a longer survey. Like in the workplace, we keep surveys to generally like 10 minutes, and the survey was not. So anyone with dyslexia might be less willing to invest their time into a long survey like that. Like that would be a reasonable explanation as well. There's a lot of different things that play into it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Another question we had, which you may think that actually you've already answered this really, but are people with a high IQ more likely to have mental health issues such as depression or anxiety?
Yeah, we found that to be the case. We found And the mental health issues, I think what's hard about the term mental health, I mean, it's very self-explanatory, right? But it comes with cost to be labeled having a mental health issue. But definitely the depression anxiety piece is really what we were talking about earlier, which is the rumination and the worry. It's not just people with circumstantial depression or being worried about something. It is to a different degree, which, is that a mental health issue or is that a consequence of having high IQ? And as Audrey was saying, not all people struggle with depression, anxiety. It's more of how people with high IQ view the world and how we take in our stimuli, whether it's internal or external. And
Mm.
so there's a lot of talk about, is it really mental health? Is it just a high level of processing our environment? And, not having this stigma attached so much to the mental health. That's why putting a high IQ out in the forefront and getting more people talking about it will kind of destigmatize some of these things. So definitely our study showed that there is a more likelihood of having what the DSM or what we would consider as mental health, depression, anxiety issues.
Okay, thank you very much for that. The question number three asked whether the results might show a potential relationship between high IQ and the prevalence of certain physiological and psychological conditions, or is it more representative, this data set, of a self-selecting group of high IQ individuals that come from Mensa? So I suppose the question is asking, is this study representative of high IQ in general or of Mensans, or both?
Yeah, that's a really good question and a very common one that we found in Reddit and reviewers and everything else. Um, and one of the things that can kind of more anecdotally, the amount that this resonates with non-Mensa members and the number of stories and feedback that we get. And I'll also say that neither Ruth or I are Mensa members. When I started this research with her, I had seasonal allergies, but none of the other things. Now I can tick off 5 of those boxes. um, so yeah, those like yeah, the that part of it, I I think that can kind of like help you think about the amount of, is this just Mensa members or is this like just generally people with higher intelligence? Um, but this is also just something that we think about with uh sampling in general. Like these kind of questions are always going to come up. Uh
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
this was a big one. This was one that when we would get criticisms, this would be one of them. My response is always that uh, there are so many communities within high IQ, right? And that goes back to Dabrowski's overexcitabilities. We have those who are imaginational. I don't have that overexcitability. I don't like Halloween. I don't love dressing up. And then I have my sweet Audrey who's like she is imaginational queen. And so we can argue, or I have argued, that doctoral programs are not representative of high IQ, that there are many subsets within high IQ that are not representative. Like I feel like everybody's representative, right? When you have an IQ over 130. So I get frustrated with this question, not that it's being asked, but just that we don't have a good handle on who high IQ individuals really are, um, because Mensa can tend to, at least in the United States, get kind of a bad rap, and it really upsets me because um, I feel like you are representative, and so we just have to do more research to be able to show that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's the real thing, isn't it? We need more research, and this this research study and now the one that we've replicated, it's just the beginning, hopefully, right, of shedding more light on all of this.
Yeah, and the differences in how Mensa is viewed between the US and the UK is also something to consider, that the motivations for people to join and stay in Mensa
Mm,
differ, but the results are similar. So that kind of helps point out that this is more likely to be representative of those with high IQ rather than just part of Mensa itself. And
mhm.
also, if you're thinking about like, oh, maybe people with depression are seeking out, slower people, that doesn't really explain why people with more allergies join Mensa. So,
Exactly. No, it's very
Yep.
interesting.
Yep.
I mean, number four, actually, if I stick with you, Audrey, is I guess a fairly straightforward sampling question. Was the research carried out on a random selection of medicines, or was it dependent on people putting themselves forward?
yeah, all surveys are have a little bit of bias of people putting themselves forward with that. Like, but the UK one was sent out to every Mensa person. If you sample the entire population, you don't actually have as many issues with like issues with random sampling and things like that. Um, so yeah, so in the US one, there's a research pool of people that volunteer to be part of research in general, and we sent it out to that entire pool. This is just standard practice for this kind of research. But we try to be transparent about it. We try to make sure mitigate issues with it by not including in the email too much information about what's in the survey, so you don't bias who opens the survey and starts it. And we check the respondents demographically to make sure that, like we have a similar mix of like age and gender and income and race and all any of those boxes that we can do those comparisons just to make sure that is representative in those
Mm.
ways.
Fantastic, thank you. Just letting everybody who's listening know that we have about 5 minutes left. I think if everybody is okay to stay, maybe just an extra 5 minutes, we can definitely easily wrap up the presentation. We're coming closer to the end. Question number five. I combined three really great questions that we had because they were mostly about health, fitness, exercise, diet, sleep, that kind of stuff, and how to optimize those things. If you would all permit me, because I'm a personal trainer also and have been for a good 30 years now, I would be very happy to write an article that covers all of this in the context of high IQ and to send that to Kaylee and Danielle. And that can maybe be shared on the Mensa website or be emailed out to everyone. So then I can give you a really comprehensive answer, if that's okay. And I think, Ruth, you just had a comment you wanted to add on this particular question.
Mm. Yeah, I'm very interested in the diet aspect. Again, every single one of us is so unique in what we are sensitive to. When you look at allergies, you look at the food allergies and things like that. We are all very unique in how we process food, whether it be carbohydrates or something we're allergic to. So there is something, any diet that is inflammatory to you is something to definitely take a look at. I would argue any of us, whether we have high IQ or not. But the high IQ piece is important because um, they're coming up with an interesting theory right now in the world of autism about what's called the MTHFR variant, and that some people have, and that is something that allows us to detox whatever it is. It could be perfume in a department store that I am horribly sensitive to, or that the body doesn't detox the way that it should. And we heard that in the field of autism very recently, very publicly. So this is a new area of exploration. I feel like it has a lot more to do with how we detox toxins in any form in our body than it does necessarily what it's made of. We're all very different in how we process things. So that's my longer answer to what I think about the health part and the diet part. But I'm looking forward to reading what Elisa has to offer us in this since she's more of the expert. But I just wanted to throw that in there because I do think it's interesting and people being tested for that in our population, I think is very important to see how we eliminate toxins that we ingest.
Excellent. Thank you, Ruth. And we have an observation on the next slide to wrap up the presentation, but we have one more question here. I thought this was a really nice representation of the life experiences, maybe that a lot of Mensans do have. And in this particular question, the individual is saying that they have anxiety issues during exams. They do a lot of hard work. They understand concepts easily, but then they get told by the teachers they're not reading the question properly and they jump to answer, which sounds exactly like my son, actually, but it wasn't written by my son. And this person says, sometimes my mind gets confused and I give the wrong answer subsequently. Could the researchers help me on this? Now, I get a feeling that this might be something where we find some resources that we can direct this individual to, as opposed to maybe covering it today. But do you think that there are some TUI links that we could maybe, or I could maybe forward on after the presentation?
Yeah, there's a lot of information that we can send. So definitely a great question, and kind of what I was alluding to in the very beginning of the talk, um, where sometimes our executive function is getting in the way of our ability to manifest our high IQ. And unfortunately, this is an example of how teachers and educators are not informed enough about twice exceptionality. And if we can just put a few, I would recommend, I'm not sure what level you are in school right now, but there are accommodations that could be made, taking breaks when you're doing a test. And there's things in different legally, I believe, at least in the US, there's legally things that you need to be accommodated for to produce your best work. And I'm sorry that you're made to feel that are not reading it properly. Things like that just shows that the educator is not well informed on twice exceptionality, but there is help out there, so we can get that to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And, you have my sympathy too. This is such a common issue, I think we find. And I just wanted to finish with a general observation. I think the concept of twice exceptionality, high IQ, and specifically autism is something that comes up quite often. And this was an observation that somebody made. And they were talking about how, that in many cases, there seems to be a link between autism and gut microbiome dysbiosis. And it'd be interesting if this model could expand to encompass that specific kind of concept. Now, obviously, that's outside of the bounds of this particular research at this particular time. But I just wondered what you guys thought about this as a closing thought, especially what you've been saying, Ruth, about information and about the concepts of autism you've been talking about. And this last comment that the individual has said, additionally, it may be the case that the individual's own hypersensitivity induces microbial shifts due to increased incidences of stress. So Ruth and Audrey, I'd love to just get your final thoughts on that if you'd like to share anything before we wrap up.
Sure. The mind, the brain, and the gut are in direct communication. So anything that involves the gut is definitely affects the brain, and vice versa. And actually, I will tell you that we talked about this in the very beginning. What were my why did I want to do this study? It really did start with this. It really did start with the gut, with autism, and that alteration. And this MTHFR that I mentioned is definitely related to this, but in how that gut microbiome is affected by various toxins. And definitely the gut and the brain, they call it the second brain, that the gut is the second brain. So that is just my observation as well in the research that I'm reading. This is a really important factor that needs to be more explored.
Definitely. Thank you. And Audrey, any other points you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just want to point out that this research on looking at the extremely high intelligence community, it's really new. Like they just haven't been doing this research really. Um, and our research is exploratory and it's meant to be a jumping off point for other researchers with the resources to be able to really explore these kind of deeper questions and do the tests that, biologically with rats and all these different things. So we hope that we get more researchers interested in this kind of topic to explore this kind of questions because it's fascinating and it's very much needed.
Yes.
Definitely, definitely. Well, thank you very much, guys. I want to say thank you, Ruth and Audrey, for being here, for doing this research. I think the research that you're doing here is absolutely incredible. It's absolutely our pleasure to have you involved in leading this study for British Mensa as well. And it's just such a fascinating, much needed area. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Cannot thank you enough. And I want to thank everybody who is watching for listening. I'd like to thank you again for participating in the survey, because as I said at the beginning, there is no research without the Mensa members participating and giving their time and their experiences. So thank you very much. If you have any follow-up questions, I've just given you my Mensa research email here, or you could also just use my work email if you wanted to send off any ideas, any questions you have for Audrey or Ruth, please send them to me and I can forward them on. And if you do have, kind of more qualitative experiences that you would like to share, whether this has resonated with you in your own life, if you recognize yourself in anything that's been discussed today, we would absolutely love to hear it. So thank you, everybody, for listening today. And I'll pass it back to you, Danielle and Kaylee.